Look, I think at the end of the day, Israel made the decision that it could no longer wait, that Iran's nuclear program has been a challenge it has been trying to confront for decades now. But over the last, especially 6 to 12 months, the situation in both the region and in Iran had changed, that Israel felt there was a window of opportunity it had to take. Part of that change was Israel's doing. It had diminished a lot of Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and so the threat of retaliation was diminished in terms of what would be incoming to Israel. And part of it was how Iran has advanced its nuclear program. The least talked about, but maybe most interesting data point from yesterday before the strikes was that the IAEA, for the first time in 20 years, said Iran was not in compliance with its non-proliferation obligations. I think that helped to serve as another bedrock point to the Israelis, the diplomatic side of kind of their military coin, about the need to make these strikes happen now, that they couldn't wait any longer, that Iran's program was advancing too quickly and time was running out to undermine it.
In terms of the U.S. involvement or non-involvement, we heard from Secretary Rubio saying this is a unilateral action. And then President Trump on social media said, among other things, the next attack being planned will be, quote, even more brutal. I'm trying to ascertain what the U.S. policy and role, if any, is in this.
I think the second part of that is easier to answer than the first. I think there was no U.S. role in the strike so far. I think Israel certainly gave fair warning of some sort, and that allowed the U.S. to evacuate, as we saw in the days before, a number of its embassies and personnel from the region in the event that this happened. I think the question on strategy is rightly a little bit more confusing. I think you have Secretary Rubio, frankly, quite significantly distancing the U.S. from Israel in a way that I really haven't seen before under Democratic administrations or Republicans when you're talking about an Israeli strike and Israeli action in the region. But President Trump this morning came back and was almost encouraging and said, no, it was well done and that the next one could be more, so Iran should negotiate. I don't think this is going to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. I think it's more likely to push them further away. But I also think that the question remaining is going to be, okay, so these strikes are going to continue. Is the U.S. going to join Israel? Or is the U.S. going to use some of the more advanced bombing capabilities, the bigger bombs, the mother of all bombs, the Moab, as it's called, to actually destroy the more hardened Iranian nuclear facilities like Fordow?
So, Jonathan, how do you think Iran will respond? What can they do?
So traditionally, I think it's not unreasonable to expect that we'll look at April of last year and October of last year as a little bit of a data point, that the Israelis didn't strike the nuclear facilities and the Iranians responded by launching drone attacks, which we saw they started last night, ballistic missile strikes, which I think they will also try. But the reality is, Israel over the last 12 months has really diminished Iran's capabilities as well, including on its ballistic missile capabilities. That's not to say they can't do damage. It's not to say they can't overwhelm the Israeli system. They certainly can. But I think you may see a situation in which Iran says it's finally going to unleash and turn to more asymmetric efforts as well. In other words, global terrorist attacks. There's been long planning of Iran's elite guards and Quds Force to plan and undertake attacks as far away as Latin America, Southeast Asia, against Israeli and Jewish targets. And I think if the Iranians feel, especially the hardliners, that they're not having sufficient success in striking Israel directly because too much is being defended and knocked down, that's where I would expect them to turn. And that is going to be harder to defend.